Welcome to episode 382 of the Postal Hub podcast. I'm Ian Kerr. In this episode, I'm joined by Kate Muth, Executive Director at IMAG. We're going to talk about tariffs. Joining me on the line is Kate Muth. Kate is Executive Director at the International Mailers Advisory Group, IMAG. Kate, welcome back. We're returning to our favourite topic, tariffs. And we're recording this the first week of November. So tariffs are back in the news. Kate, can you just give us the Reader's Digest version of what's happening this week with regard to the US Supreme Court and tariffs and all that sort of stuff?
Yeah, great. Well, thank you, Ian. And I'm glad to be back, and good timing because we did just have oral arguments in the Supreme Court case regarding the tariffs, what we call the IEEPA tariffs. So those are the tariffs that the president implemented under the International Economic Emergency Powers Act, and it's tariffs that have been applied on what we call the reciprocal tariffs and then the fentanyl tariffs. So I think most of your listeners are familiar with the tariffs. So the Supreme Court heard oral arguments, and I would say most of the news reports, I listened to the arguments, I followed along with some live bloggers that are so-called court watchers, and I think most of the news reports here suggested that the justices were highly skeptical of President Trump's authority to impose tariffs under IEEPA. So a lot of the questioning seemed to be on whether the president had the tariff powers. There were some very legalistic arguments going on, but I think overall the sense was that there was a good deal of skepticism that the president does have the powers under this IEEPA, under that particular act, for imposing tariffs.
So what's happening now? There've been these opening arguments. Do they all go away and think about it? Or what happens next?
Yeah, so this was just the oral argument piece of it. There's been a number of briefs filed, the amicus briefs that were filed on behalf of the companies that sued the administration, and then just a handful supporting the administration's argument. So there have been a whole series of briefs filed. I think there was something like 38 briefs filed in support of the companies challenging the tariffs. And the states, there were two suits going on, one small companies that were challenging the tariffs, and then a number of U.S. states that challenged as well, and they got merged into a single case. So a lot of briefs filed in support of the companies and against the administration. So now the justices, the arguments were a chance to ask questions of both sides of the attorneys. And now the justices will go and consider all of this and rule. And they have technically until June, until the end of their term to issue a ruling. But the expectation is that this decision could come much sooner, quite possibly between Thanksgiving and Christmas, so before the end of the year. That's especially likely if, in fact, the justices do rule against the administration. That's sort of the expectation, given that tariffs are still being collected. And the burden, again, if the justices rule against the administration and the use of tariffs under IEEPA, the expectation is that there could be a decision quite soon in the next month or so.
So the tariffs that we're talking about here, that's all of the ones that have been in the media, basically. It's not just the ones that we're concerned about in the postal world, it's the whole lot. Is that right?
That's exactly right. It's the whole lot. It's all of, like I said, the reciprocal tariffs. If you remember, so-called Liberation Day back in April, when the president was putting tariffs or announcing tariffs by country. So European Union 10% and Brazil 50%, et cetera. And then what we sort of called the fentanyl tariffs. Those were separate tariffs that were put on our neighboring countries of Mexico, Canada, and of course China as well. So those are the ones that are being challenged in the court case, and those are the ones that we're talking about. And yes, they are being paid whether you come through the commercial channel or you come through the postal channel. Those are being collected at the border.
So the question that we all want to know, the answer to, is if the Supreme Court rules that the US president didn't have the power to make these tariffs, does everybody get their money back?
So that was a very interesting exchange that came up. One of the justices asked the attorney for the companies that's representing the companies and said, essentially, what about refunds and the mess this could create? And so the attorney said, acknowledge that this is going to be difficult, but he said that's not a reason not to do something. So effectively, you shouldn't be rewarding bad policy or bad law. And he also said that the court could grant prospective relief. So essentially could say, okay, we're not going to worry about refunds, but going forward, of course, you can't collect tariffs. Or the court could remand the refund process back to the lower court. So this, I think, as most countries' Supreme Courts work, a case has to move through lower courts and appeals before it reaches the Supreme Court. So they could say, the justice could, again, if they rule against the administration, they could send it back to the lower court to sort it out. And I think most of the, the so-called court watchers and the other attorneys that are very familiar with how the Supreme Court works expect that the high court is not going to delve into the specifics of a refund process, that they will rule strictly on the tariffs and leave the refund process to the lower courts. And then I also just want to mention, because I know, de minimis is a big part of what people are focused on as well. And as you recall, that the de minimis exemption ended on August 29th. And so anything coming in under $800 now, of course, has to pay the tariffs and all customs duties, et cetera. We do not expect that will be addressed by the high court, either by the Supreme Court, either in this particular case. There is a separate case that is working its way through the Supreme Court that is specifically on the de minimis exemption and whether the president had the right to suspend that. Is that a function of and something that Congress needs to do? That's a separate case. It's actually been put on hold while this one is moving forward, while the tariffs case is moving forward. But I don't expect that the Supreme Court will address de minimis in a decision on the IEEPA tariffs.
So a couple of things out of this. One is keep your receipts, everyone. Yep. You may be getting a refund. But the second thing is that this is really focused on that tariff side of things rather than the de minimis side of things. So those of us in the postal world who have basically had a very big few months putting in place some sort of solution to deal with de minimis, I mean, that's not on the table at the moment, but it could be dealt with in a future case. Have I got that right?
Yeah, that's, again, they could hit on it in this case, in the tariff case, but highly unlikely. And there is a separate case making its way through the Supreme Court on the de minimis issue explicitly. And, it's an interesting point too, because I think for those of us in the postal world, we've kind of just merged the two together. But of course, if you're not paying tariffs, the tariffs go away, at least the IEEPA tariffs, that's relief to some degree as well.
So there's no clear answer right now. We really have to wait and see. So it's a matter of keeping an eye on this Supreme Court process, Kate. So for those postal operators out there who, let's be honest, we can't influence the process. We have to wait and see, don't we? If we're outside of the US, there's nothing we can do about it except wait. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, exactly. And even if you're in the U.S., there's not a whole lot you can do but wait. But interestingly, on the postal entry and all of that, because kind of goods are still moving, right? Although a lot of countries still are not sending packages to the U.S. through the postal channel. I think it's something like 40 to 45 countries have made some arrangements with a qualified party, which is what they need to do to send, collect and remit the duties to Customs and Border Protection. So, and it's the big countries, of course, the big trading partners that we have are the big postal operators that send a lot of volume into the U.S., but there's still a good number that are probably still making arrangements with a qualified party or using the Universal Postal Union's DDP type solution. So it's still a work in progress from that perspective. And then even as countries, our postal operators are getting up to speed on the whole current process, in the background, Customs and Border Protection is working on what will be the next framework for customs clearance. And that is probably going to look a little bit different. And commercial and postal clearance are going to be very, very similar. And there won't be a whole lot of daylight between the two. And we're expecting what we call an interim final rule on that, a rulemaking on that, sometime in the next few months. Of course, the government shutdown here has slowed some things down and made it difficult to do that interagency work that they need to do to work on a rulemaking.
So something else for us to keep an eye on in the postal world. While we're talking about de minimis, though, Kate, there's been some discussion in various other parts of the world. Well, we even mentioned it when we spoke back in 2024 about what else is happening around the world. Other countries are looking at the matter of low value goods coming into the country via the postal channel. And, well, we've seen what's happened in the US with de minimis being abolished, suspended, whatever the right phrase is. Is there anything else happening around the world at the moment that you think we need to be aware of when it comes to de minimis or low value goods and those sorts of things?
Yeah, I think there's a lot going on around the world and a lot to pay attention to. In the UK, think we're expecting something in the budget. The UK Chancellor of the Exchequer, is that how you say that? Exchequer? I don't know quite how to say that.
No, I think you've nailed it there.
Okay. So the Chancellor there is expected to include in the budget a proposal to end the low value threshold on small parcels for customs duties. So I think it's £135 right now. Goods or parcels containing goods worth up to £135 can currently be imported without customs duty. I believe that's going to be something that is in the budget where that will go away. I know the European Union's got some of the EU customs reforms on the table for 2028, but now some individual member countries, member states are putting forward their own sort of parcel fee. I think it's like €2 in France. Other countries are looking to do the same. There's been some changes in other parts of the world. I understand maybe New Zealand is looking at something. I need to get more up to speed on that. So a lot going on, a lot to keep tabs on, and all kind of happening at the same time, causing a lot of uncertainty for shippers, global shippers.
And meaning that everybody who works in the international department of the Post is very busy at the moment.
Very busy, indeed.
Tipping across policy changes.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and for someone like me, it's good for business in some ways, but also very difficult for international shippers and their service providers. And not to say that these policies are not well thought out, because I know there is a lot of attention to ensuring that your own country's retailers are not at a disadvantage, and that you want to be sure about security and all of those things. It's just a lot of changes. And oftentimes, at least here in the U.S., without a lot of advance notice. So I think that's one of the things that's just made it very difficult going into the holiday season as well, where folks are trying to sort of juggle a lot of things.
Well, Kate, that's a summary, I suppose, of what's happening. And it's an evolving situation. No, what do they say? We'll stick with this developing story or something like that. They say in the news, don't they?
They do.
Will be something we all have to keep an eye on in the postal world, since there's so much cross-border e-commerce these days. Kate, if people want to find out more about IMAG, where should they go?
They can find out more about IMAG on our newly refreshened website, www.imag.world. They can find me on LinkedIn and look for IMAG meetings in 2026. We'll be doing that with WMX Americas.
I'll stick a link to the new IMAG website and Kate's LinkedIn profile on thepostalhub.com, so you can head on over to the episode page there and you'll find all the links. Kate Muth, Executive Director at the International Mailers Advisory Group, IMAG, thank you very much for joining us on the Postal Hub podcast today.
Thank you for having me.
Coming soon on the Postal Hub podcast, we've got interviews with Giro and Unpost, CTT, POS Malaysia, Blockit, Peter Summers, Alan Barry, Carmen Correal from GeoPost, and many more. Don't miss any of these episodes. Sign up for the Postal Hub email newsletter. Go over to thepostalhub.com and follow the links to sign up for my newsletter. Subscribe to the podcast in your favourite podcast platform, Apple Podcasts or Spotify or all of the others, or any, I don't mind. What else can you do? You can follow me on LinkedIn if that's your kind of thing. And if you want to email me, my email address is ian@thepostalhub.com. I'm Ian Kerr. Thanks for listening in, and I look forward to your company next time on the Postal Hub podcast.